notification. And what was their estimate? Let me read it so I get it right. FDA concludes that the total number of businesses affected by the proposed rule will be no more than the number of new ingredients, estimated to be 0 to 12 per year. So that was then. How is FDA looking at things now? Well, the FDA views it that a supplement-based notification system is important to them because it's the only way where they can exercise preventive control over the dietary supplement market to ensure safety. So they're implying and assuming that any new supplement matrix out there has or might cause a safety concern. And what's the impact of that for you all? Well, it could require thousands of NDI notifications on products that are already in the market, that have been there for years, and have no safety concerns ever been raised about them. So it's a tremendous burden on the industry. It's also a burden on the FDA when you think of thousands of batches of paperwork coming into an agency that's already strapped for resources, is likely to get fewer resources in the future, and really needs to focus those resources on things that are important. And this provision also limits innovation. As I mentioned before, it's not the only one that does that. The overall draft guidance seems to punish past innovation and greatly put a damper on any new innovation in the industry. So what do I mean by that? The guidance seems to indicate that when certain manufacturing processes are changed from 1994 processes, that would trigger an NDI notification on a supplement. And that captures not just the next best thing in processing, but past changes as well. So a couple of examples. If you're using CO2 for its extraction instead of alcohol or water, FDA's view is that triggers notifications for your products. If you're an enzyme maker and you're using a new fermentation media, that triggers an NDI notification requirement. And it's not just the manufacturing processes. If, say, there's a new study out on a dietary ingredient that calls for an increase in the recommended daily intake, if you suggest that, if you put that on your packaging, that triggers an NDI notification in the eyes of the FDA. If you have a blend of dietary ingredients and you want to change that, that requires an NDI notification. We had a Q and answer session with FDA, and someone gave the example of fish oil. Say I took the DHA and the EPA and I just changed them a bit like that. Yes, that requires a new NDI notification. Or if you add a new dietary ingredient to the blend, that requires a new NDI notification. And I know the next speaker will talk about another provision that will be further detrimental to innovation. So overall, past innovation under this draft guidance comes today with a steep price tag, and future innovation comes with much higher costs than anyone was expecting, none of which brings greater safety, but all of which could limit the number of products that come to market, eliminate some products altogether, and make things more expensive for everyone. So with that, I'll thank you and turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Senator Hatch, for inviting us here. I'm Steve Misser with the Council for Responsible Nutrition. And this obviously is an immensely important forum to help industry members understand the impact of the FDA draft guidance and then what you can do about it. I think it's also though, important to note right up front what a critical role Senator Hatch is going to play in these discussions, because you were there when the SHA was passed. You were one of the principal architects of the SHA. And so, when we hear Senator Durbin talk about FDA doesn't have enough authority to go after certain kinds of products, when we hear our critics say dietary supplements couldn't possibly be considered a legitimate medical expense under FSA because they're not regulated. And now when we hear FDA in a guidance document taking a view of the SHA that is vastly different than the intent of Congress when they enacted this, I keep being reminded that you were there, Senator Hatch, and who better to know what congressional intent was around this law than one of the primary architects. Now, specifically on the guidance, you've heard a couple of the early discussions that get you to the safety standards. and how critical it is that we not lump in grandfathered ingredients as new. And then John talked about how important it is that we don't punish innovation by saying that everything is new if you simply improve your manufacturing process. But then you get to the third step, which is, okay, if you decided, yes, I do have a new dietary ingredient, what is the safety standard that FDA is going to hold these ingredients to? And that standard should be appropriate and attainable for the industry while giving consumers reasonable confidence in the products themselves. Now, Deshay says that a manufacturer of an NDI must provide FDA with a history of safe use or other studies demonstrating, and this is the magic language in the statute, a reasonable expectation of safety. In the years just before Deshay, as many of you will remember, FDA tried to hold dietary ingredients to the same demanding standards with the same levels of data for safety as it requires of chemical colorants and preservatives that would be considered food additives. And Deshay rejected that. That standard was a reasonable certainty of safety, and Deshay requires a reasonable expectation of safety. Now what we see FDA doing through this guidance is trying to redefine what is a reasonable expectation to almost the same level as a reasonable certainty, which is exactly what Deshay endeavored to prevent. Now, if you just look at the requirements that are spelled out in the guidance documents, the level of animal and human studies required, the calls for multi-generational rodent studies, 2-year carcinogenesis studies, and so on, and particularly the repeated reference in the document to something called the Red Book, which of course is the Bible for how you file a food additive petition. You start to see this constant drumbeat from FDA that would hold dietary ingredients to the food additive standard. Even the fact that FDA offers up the GRAS self-affirmation as a route to marketing in lieu of an NDI is in fact a Trojan horse, because to go this route of the GRAS notification and petition process forsakes the NDI process and basically concedes that we would be held to that level of safety standard that is applied for food additives and not for dietary ingredients. Now the reality is to do these kinds of studies would be both costly and time-consuming and delay your entry to market for these ingredients. These requirements have to then be set against the backdrop that in the 17 years since the passage of Deshay, FDA has a history of not enforcing the NDI requirements even amongst the most egregious fringe elements of the industry. So now we're entering an era where FDA is likely to receive even less funding, to have even fewer resources for enforcement. And what that means is that this NDI guidance will simply widen the gap between responsible companies who will follow whatever ends up being in the final guidance because that's what they do. And they will allow their innovations to be forestalled. And those who continue to ignore the NDI guidance will continue to ignore it. And consumers will suffer on both ends of the industry. And what if you're a company that submits your data and FDA still says no? Well, the fact is that this is a notification process, not an application process. And that dictates that a company ought to be able to take the ingredient to market even over the agency's objection. But the consequences of filing an NDI notification, as the guidance sets up, may simply be putting a bullseye on your back for FDA enforcement. FDA's policies should not penalize companies who are trying to do the right thing, while its practices simply ignore those who flout the law entirely. And lastly, a word about FDA's position that synthetic versions of dietary ingredients are not really dietary ingredients. You know, we covered this issue back in the 70s with respect to vitamins and minerals. If the molecules are identical, then FDA can't disadvantage one over the other. It was put into law in the Proxmire amendments and then repeated in Deshay. But apparently Deshay didn't make that clear enough when it comes to botanical ingredients. Because FDA has used this NDI guidance document to articulate a view that synthetically produced versions of a constituent of a plant cannot be a dietary ingredient at all, even though it may be bioidentical to the constituent. Now today, there are any number of dietary supplements on the market that contain a synthetically produced version of a botanical ingredient. Now this may